morning, Morena. Hello, I am Trina Cooper. I'm the General Manager for PADA. Thank you for making time to be part of our PADA pop-up chat today with Marion Maw from Fixate, talking about perinatal OCD. The session is being recorded and will be made available on the PADA website. Please note that your video image may be seen when we share the presentation on our website and social media, so please ensure that you have your camera turned off if you want to remain incognito. And we ask that you remain muted. If you wish to ask a question, please use the chat function you see at the bottom of your screen, and these will be addressed at the end of the presentation. OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, is an experience of mental distress in which an individual's mind gets stuck on unwanted repetitive thoughts. It's quite common for a parent to experience OCD during pregnancy and or while caring for a baby. It's important that people know how to recognise when someone may be experiencing OCD and how to access peer support and treatment. In perinatal OCD, the parent's intrusive thoughts often involve distressing fears that their actions or inaction may harm the baby in some way. To relieve anxiety, the parent seeks certainty that their baby is safe and so may repeatedly check the baby, seek reassurance from others and or avoid certain situations. During this presentation, Marion will share the lived experience of some New Zealand parents and talk about what they would like health professionals to know about perinatal OCD. Marion, I will now hand over to you, and you can now create your presentation, please.
Great, thank you, Gina. Okay, so OCD is a reasonably common experience of mental distress, but it often goes unrecognised. The person who's experiencing the OCD doesn't understand what it is that is troubling them, and often the people around them don't recognise it either, their family or perhaps their GP, midwife. So what we're really wanting to do is to try and raise awareness of OCD so that people get the support that they need earlier. Although the OCD itself may be unrecognised, what people may see is the anxiety that's associated with it. And often there's also depression, and in some cases there's also an increased risk for suicidal thoughts. So in those situations where someone is anxious, depressed, perhaps suicidal, it's important to just consider the possibility that OCD might be involved. I'm not a clinician in any way. I'm speaking very much from a peer support perspective as an admin for an OCD support group. So just want to put that in mind, that it would be really good perhaps at some stage to have a clinician provide that clinical perspective on OCD. So OCD, as I say, is a moderately common experience. About 1 in 100 people at any given time are experiencing OCD, and over a lifetime that rises to about 1 in 50 people. During pregnancy, with perhaps the responsibilities, maybe the tiredness, some hormones, it's not really known exactly why, but it is known that during pregnancy and following the birth in that perinatal period, that there is an increased incidence of OCD. So about 2 in 100 women during pregnancy, 2 to 3 women in that year after giving birth, and also the fathers may experience OCD at that time. It might be an OCD that's been previously experienced worsens, or it might be the first time that someone experiences OCD during that period. So Fixate is a Facebook group. It's been running for about 3 years now, but in the last year there's been a lot of growth in membership, so that we've got 300 members now, and that's steadily rising. We're nationwide, so anybody who is comfortable using Facebook has access to us. It doesn't matter, you know, if you're living somewhere quite isolated, so long as you've got that Facebook access, then you can join our community. We are a private group so that we can have open safe discussions about the things that are concerning people. Anybody though who, provided they live in New Zealand and either live with OCD themselves or support someone living with OCD is most welcome to join the group. You just need to go to the Facebook page, click the join and answer a couple of screening questions. We're a very informal group. There's no legal structure, and what we're really just doing is sharing information, sharing our experiences, and providing a place really where people just feel comfortable to talk. We see ourselves as being complementary to other peer support and also to clinical support. We're not really aiming to offer anything more widely than this informal structure, although we are getting now into a little bit of advocacy and awareness work to try and make the public and health professionals more aware of the issues that concern us. So we're part of a wider global OCD community, some of which is very well established and has created some great resources. So there's the US IOCDF, in the UK, there's OCD UK and OCD Action. They've got some really great resources on their websites, and they run some really nice conferences. I also strongly recommend the OCD Stories podcast series, which has been going a couple of years now. There's over 200 episodes on there where either people living with OCD or therapists are interviewed, and really just very inspiring, very informative, and I strongly recommend them. The episodes are searchable, so if you're wanting, for example, to find something on perinatal OCD, you can just put that in and you'll find some interviews of either lived experience or of therapists talking. There's also books available. Often actually public libraries is a great place to go for a start if you're trying to find some information and just get out a good book. There's some really nice freely available videos and podcasts, and there are some sites specifically for perinatal OCD. On our website, there's links to a lot of this material, so you don't need to be madly writing all this down. You just need to go to our website and have a look around there, and you'll find some useful links. Okay, so what is OCD? I think it's useful to have an idea of kind of what the formal descriptions of OCD are, but what I'll mainly concentrate today really is on sharing some more lived experience accounts. When I first was looking for answers, I did come across some information that looked somewhat like this sort of entry, and I didn't actually find it that useful. It was a little bit too much jargon for me, and I actually found hearing people's accounts of their own personal stories, I found that a more something I could more easily connect to. So obsessive compulsive disorder involves obsessive thoughts, and in response to those thoughts, repetitively carrying out an action to try and address the thoughts. And those actions are called compulsions. They may be mental, or they may be physical. So a mental thing might be rechecking over, thinking over an incident, trying to assess what it was that really happened, and maybe trying to work out whether you think something was really a risk or might not be a risk, and so on. Or maybe doing some kind of mental counting or repeating some kind of mantra that helps you try and battle these uncomfortable thoughts and feelings you're having. Or it might be something quite physical, like the classic one would be washing your hands, for example, if you were concerned about contamination. So in OCD, we talk about people having themes. So often there'll be a variety of thoughts that you're having, but they all tend often to cluster around a particular theme. So you might have a general theme of contamination. You might have one about safety, where you're concerned about things like, did you turn the oven off or not? It might be around harm or sexual orientation, could be about health, morality, religion, actually anything that you care about, you can develop an OCD theme around. These obsessions and compulsions, it's called a disorder. This is more than kind of an everyday worrying about real life problems, or even a more just sort of straight anxiety disorder. It's slightly different, not to downplay anxiety disorders, but this is slightly different. Anxiety is involved, but the reasons for the anxiety are slightly different. It's severe enough that this is time consuming. It's taking up at least an hour of your day, and it's causing you distress. It's interfering with your ability to do everyday things, to look after your baby, to go to work, to have a good relationships with your family. It really is something that is a problem in your life in order to be getting this diagnosis of OCD. People often say, I'm a little OCD, but real OCD is not something to be taken lightly. So underlying, kind of at the heart of OCD, are intrusive thoughts. And everybody has intrusive thoughts. They're completely normal. It's just something that our brains seem to do. They're kind of constantly active, and these things pop up in our minds. They're sometimes referred to as being junk mail. They're often quite strange thoughts. Sometimes they're really, if you take them seriously, they're just really horrible. It's completely normal to have them. And a common example would be if you are, say, standing on the edge of a cliff, or maybe on a train platform, you might sort of have an image pop in your head, or kind of an urge or a thought that perhaps you could jump off. You could jump in front of the train, you could jump over the cliff. And it's not that you intend to, and usually it's very fleeting, and you might think, oh, that's not very nice, that's weird. And usually you then just kind of get on with your life. It doesn't stay with you. But in OCD, these uninvited thoughts, these random thoughts, if they hit something that's important to you, so for example, if you really care about your baby and it's a new responsibility, an intrusive thought that concerns your baby might be one that stays in your mind and gets stuck there. And you feel a need, you feel an emotional discomfort, and you feel a need to do something about it. And so you treat it as a meaningful thing that you need to act upon. And that kind of process is the beginning of what can become a obsessive spiral for a person who has OCD. So to give you some examples of that, these are some thoughts that one of our Fixate members has kindly shared. So she says, I had images of kicking my son when he was lying on the mat. So I would walk with a gap around the mat, or crawl to him on the mat. She no longer trusted herself to walk anywhere near her son. Kept changing the baby's nappy, and a thought pops up. What if you're a paedophile? And this then turned into, why would you even think that, you weirdo? Does that mean I really am a paedophile? So that thought has stuck. It's being taken seriously. And now there's concerns about changing nappies. Maybe you don't want to change the nappy unless there's someone there with you. I didn't dare kiss my baby on the head or face, as he might catch a cold sore. That wasn't actually active on my lips. I believed he would catch the cold sore that was non-existent, and he would die. I would check Google to see how likely it is to pass on cold sores, which obviously Google would say that they are highly infectious. What if I become really depressed and will not be able to look after my son, and then he will be taken into care? So then I would mentally check if I was depressed each day. Now, these are just a few of the thoughts that one woman was having, and they all have this common theme of a fear of harm coming to her baby. Each individual thought on its own is kind of distressing enough, but what happens if you're experiencing OCD is you start to experience a kind of a blizzard of thoughts. It becomes quite unrelenting. And so you get caught in a kind of a spiral. This is some further words about this. One night, a thought came out of nowhere. What if I kicked the baby off the bed when he was getting changed? This freaked me out, and I started berating myself. Why would you even think that? Do you want to hurt him? Are you secretly a horrible person? It quickly escalated, and I was crippled with fear, feeling confused, constantly questioning myself and seeking reassurance that I was a good person. The thoughts I was having went totally against my personality and my values, yet the thoughts kept growing. Everything I saw from then on was linked to harm. At one point, I asked my partner to hide the knives in the kitchen, as I was afraid I would sleepwalk and hurt everyone without me even knowing. So at this point, those around you may realise that you're quite tense, you're quite anxious, clearly something's not right. But if you're not aware of what OCD is, you've never heard of harm OCD, it can be very hard to get that first understanding of what is actually happening. And that's where we really think awareness is something that people need to have. And also that knowledge that intrusive thoughts are actually quite normal. So why does one person get drawn into OCD, whereas others do not, even though everybody has intrusive thoughts? Well, it's partly about genetics. It's not very well understood yet exactly what's going on, but it is very clear that there is a genetic involvement. And so OCD tends to have a familial component. Early life events are also important. Both of these things may be affecting brain development. So if a baby is born premature, low birth weight, high birth weight, indications of a stressful period during that time when the baby's born and its brain is still developing. So probably what this is an indication of is some challenges, difficulties at that time in brain development. Then later in life, those individuals are at higher risk of developing OCD. In later sort of life too, it's an issue with, for example, traumatic events. So if someone experiences traumatic events, perhaps develops PTSD, where they're having mental distress associated with a particular event, that can kind of widen so that people become distressed about potentially other things going wrong as well, and that can develop into an OCD, so that sometimes you see both things and you need both issues to be addressed. So I've kind of talked a little bit about risk factors, but you could turn that around and talk about protective factors. And as I said, I think it'd be great, for example, if people knew what intrusive thoughts were, if they understood that they were normal and that everybody does have these thoughts, there wouldn't possibly that would be a little bit protective against being sucked into the spiral of thinking that something really bad and problematic is involved in having an intrusive thought. It's my understanding, from what little I know, that there is screening for mental health during pregnancy and that perinatal care. And I think it'd be really great if there was specifically some screening questions around OCD, just a few questions around, are you having any thoughts that are troubling you? And are you needing to do anything in response to those thoughts? And I'll talk about that a little bit later, about some suggested questions to help people disclose OCD. People may actually be experiencing OCD, but just not themselves recognise, have the words, the vocabulary to talk about it. And so they may need someone to kind of prompt them a little. Okay. So as well as harm OCD, another quite common theme during the perinatal period is contamination OCD. This is a woman who during her pregnancy was given a leaflet about what it was safe to eat and what you should be careful about, perhaps avoid eating while you're pregnant in order to protect your baby. And that, of course, is a great thing. That's information that women need. But for this particular woman, she had intrusive thoughts around this that developed into an obsession theme. So it started when I was following the pamphlets, which specify what food you can eat and can't. Slowly that extended to more foods I couldn't eat, and certain ways that items needed to be cleaned before they could be used. We didn't realise anything was wrong. I mean, it's normal for people to be slightly more careful while they are pregnant, right? Looking back, there were so many signs. By the time I was seen, I was eating limited amounts of food, and they were worried about the baby not getting enough nutrients. So the person who's experiencing OCD, they often, they understand that other people don't have these same concerns and need to do these same things, but they really believe that they need to do it, and it's often difficult to have that perspective, to realise that what's happening is actually, that something's not right. And it really can need to be others around you who initiate that conversation with you. This is an example of a father who'd actually been living many years with undiagnosed OCD. He'd experienced OCD involving other kinds of themes. But when he and his wife started planning to have a family, he began to experience harm OCD. The first wave of harm thoughts came around harming my wife. This grew and intensified as we discussed and started planning for a child. It only intensified further when our daughter was born. There were swirling issues as a father, wanting to do the best for your child, trying to meet the child's needs, having love and affection, whilst at the same time, all these horrible thoughts flood one's mind. And the more anxious I became, the more the thoughts came. So harm and contamination is really, common, but it will be anything that is important to the person. I compare this sometimes to siblings. Siblings, throw all these little nitpicky little comments at you when you're young, and most of them you sort of don't react to because they don't really bother you too much. And every now and again, the sibling just kind of accidentally hits the target, the thing that's a sore point, a sensitive spot, and you react. And the sibling goes, "Oh yeah," and delivers more. And OCD is kind of like that. It really sometimes seems quite cruel because it is the thing you care about that it picks upon. So this lady, Jenny Yip, who is actually a OCD therapist and has lived experience of OCD. She was in recovery from OCD. She's very knowledgeable, obviously, as a therapist about OCD. And she knew that when she was expecting that this was a risk period, and she was, alert for against getting sucked, into spirals of OCD again. But this one, as OCD does, it's kind of sneaky, kind of creeps up, and you can kind of fall a bit into the hole before you realise what's happening, and then you use your tools to pull yourself back out again. Well, she had twins. And what she developed a fear around was that she would love one twin more than the other, and that would cause emotional damage to their well-being. And so to counteract this, she felt that what she needed to do was to do everything for one son exactly the same for the other. So if she gave one son some attention and to a certain quality of attention, she needed to make sure that she did exactly the same for the other baby. She's breastfeeding the babies. When she fed the babies, she was attempting to make sure that she gave them equal amounts of milk. So of course it's a completely impossible goal to achieve. All you can really do is fail when you're trying to do the impossible. And fortunately, you know, she kind of pulled out and recognized, as people learn to do, what was happening, and put her kind of toolkit in and pull herself back out again. And that's really what OCD recovery is about. It's not about never getting stuck on a thought again. It's more about learning to recognize the pattern and having the tools to pull yourself back out. So particularly in the perinatal OCD, there's an importance of understanding what harm OCD is and having awareness of that in the context of psychosis. So I'm not at all qualified to talk about psychosis, but I understand that it's a relatively rare but quite serious experience. Harm OCD, I would say, is probably considerably more common, but it could be confused with someone having psychosis. So I'd just like to read this, because I think it may be an example where a GP who perhaps didn't know about harm OCD may have feared that the person was actually experiencing psychosis. I explained that I had looped thoughts of harming myself and others, but I didn't want to kill myself or hurt my child. I loved him. My doctor looked very worried. She explained that she was going to call maternal mental health and the crisis team, because we need to make sure that everyone is safe. I questioned if I was going to be staying at the hospital, and she replied that it was probable you'll be going to the ward for some time. This actually fed my OCD. It must be true then. I must be a danger to me, my son, myself, and others around me. And maybe the hospital would be the safest place for us all. So when this woman was seen by the mental health acute care people, then that was the point at which the recognition occurred, which of course is what's needed in order to then access the therapy. And even before accessing the therapy, it's just such a tremendous relief to know, to understand that what's happening to you, it has a name, and there are then some ways that you will be supported. It's just this huge change and hope. You begin to see a way forward. Yes, you are very tired. Yes, you are very scared, but we can see you are not going to hurt yourself and the baby, and that you're doing a great job. What's been happening is you have been experiencing intrusive thoughts, and that's part of the disorder OCD. You are not going mad. I wept and wept with relief that my thoughts weren't real, and that in fact this was a disorder. And then the support, the clinical support kicked in, and of course also the family then also get an understanding of how they can support someone who has OCD. So and you can begin perhaps to connect to peer support of others who've experienced this. So a referral to maternal mental health, working with a psychologist, CBT, ACT, and the thing that is particularly needed for OCD treatment, exposure response prevention therapy. They were an excellent service. From engaging in therapy and doing some personal work with meditation and mindfulness techniques, I was able to get my life back and not be crippled with fear any longer. And as I was saying, when you're in recovery, it's not that the OCD completely goes away, but you know how to deal with it. I can get some days when OCD comes knocking. However, I have the tools now to deal with those times and get me back on track. So I was talking earlier about how do you help someone talk about what they're experiencing? And this is an article from the Australian Family Physician that was published back in 2013. And it's a really quite reasonably short article, and it's a very practical one, which is advice for GPs because of the journal it's in. I think it's also some relevance probably to midwives. Just saying, how do you recognise it? When should you be looking for it? And where should you be referring? So it asks about some of the observable behaviours, but it also asks some questions that are a little bit generic. Do you have to do things over and over even though you don't want to? So if someone's doing something other than washing or checking, that might help bring that out. Is there any thought that keeps bothering you that you would like to get rid of but cannot? Troubling thoughts can really affect our mood and our way of life. Do you think this could be the cause of your anxiety? You could say, is it the cause of your depression? Could it be the cause of your suicidal thoughts? Is there something underneath this? And to really provide that reassurance that they can tell you anything, because it's so hard to say, you know, I'm worried I might hurt someone. That it's such a confusing, troubling, really difficult thing to say. Sometimes it's actually suggested that people might like to write it down because that can be easier than saying it. So what's happening really in OCD is that people are trying to achieve complete certainty, to be absolutely certain that something isn't going to go wrong, that they're not going to fail to act, or that they're going to do an action, you know, that might lead to harm of some kind. So the general motto is to learn how to embrace uncertainty, and also to learn to understand that intrusive thoughts are just a thought, so that you can treat them like a cloud floating through your mind. They drift in, drift out, you see them there, but you don't need to do anything about them. And you don't need to feel anxious about them. The way to learn about this in particular in a practical way is the therapy I mentioned, exposure response prevention therapy. And what happens with that is that you're trying to break the cycle of having those uncomfortable emotions associated with intrusive thoughts and then responding with an action, which, because you took it seriously, actually feeds back and reinforces it, and you get more intrusive thoughts. So the therapy is that what you learn to do is actually to put yourself in situations where you will feel uncomfortable, where you will feel fearful, and then to sit with the anxiety or with the fear or the disgust and sit with those uncomfortable emotions and just accept them, which of course has crossover to mindfulness, and to not do the actions, and that way to learn that in fact, generally speaking, nothing terrible happens. It's a very challenging thing to do because you very genuinely believe that there is a problem, and so you're very, very fearful, and because of that, it's a process that is taken slowly in steps. It's not something that you just kind of go cold turkey with. And I'd just like to point out in that context that families and friends will often have been helping a person unknowingly with their compulsions. So a person will be seeking reassurance. They might be asking you to do things because they don't want to do them themselves, and so on. And it's important not to just pull all of that away when you realize that this is OCD and you realize that's been feeding the OCD. You may think, oh, I've got to stop that. It's important that this happens gradually with the person's agreement, with the guidance of the therapist, so that it is a gentle, supported thing. So just really important to actually get that advice rather than to just immediately change anything. Medication, SSRIs, are often used to treat depression, but they're also very useful in OCD. And the reason for that, sort of in simple terms, is that it kind of decreases the strength, the urgency of the obsessive thoughts and so the emotional discomfort, and that makes it easier to undertake the therapy because you're not so absolutely overwhelmed by what's happening in your mind. But for the long term, it's the therapy that actually gets you the tools that you need. So often a combination of the two is a really great way to go. Because the therapy is so challenging, a lot of people find ACT a very useful kind of wraparound to the ERP, because ACT is all about people learning to identify and follow their goals, and that gives you a context in which you can see that the OCD is actually holding you back from living the life that you want to live. And you can kind of, if the OCD is still sort of there in the background, you can kind of just take it along for the ride. It's coming with you, but you're going to do what you need to do regardless. So on average, the international figure takes 7 years to access diagnosis and treatment. Why is that, and what can we do about it? It's such a lot of unnecessarily grief, trauma, impact on people's relationships, their education, their employment, just so many knock-on effects. How can we make sure that people get the help they need earlier? Well, one thing is that public awareness of OCD is around a really narrow stereotype on just a few themes. And I think it's more an awareness of the behaviours rather than an understanding that the behaviours are in response to really troubling thoughts and emotional distress. So we'd really like to try and improve awareness of that with the public, and also to some degree with health professionals. The knowledge seems to be quite patchy, and so the feedback from our members really is if you go in and ask for help and you say that you're distressed and that you're washing your hands a lot and so on, that will quite quickly be recognised as OCD. If you kind of go in and maybe you don't share what thoughts you're having because you just can't bring yourself to, and you simply talk about being anxious or depressed, then maybe that's harder to spot, and unless you're specifically helped to disclose it, then that becomes a barrier to actually getting the help you need. People often, who've lived with OCD for a long time, their past experiences perhaps haven't been good. They've maybe not had the right kind of therapy, or they've had people kind of say to them or say to themselves, because you kind of absorb it from around you, from the community, that really you should just be kind of pulling your socks up, stop doing it. and you may just kind of have lost your sense of self-belief that you're capable of getting out of this, of learning to manage this. And that partly, I think, is where a peer support group is really helpful, because hearing other people talk, learning how other people are doing, it just, in a different way from reading a book or that really personal contact, I think is a great thing for actually helping people get that belief back that they can change things. As I said, this kind of social barriers to people actually ever kind of going to their health professional. There's financial barriers in that a lot of people have trouble at the moment accessing treatment through the public system, and so they are going privately, and of course that costs money, and many people just can't afford it. There's workforce issues, and that there really aren't enough therapists at the moment who are trained in OCD treatment. And geographical issues, because if you live in, say, a rural area, then there may be no one near you. The geographical barriers, fortunately, breaking down somewhat, and that now a lot of therapists will actually offer online treatment, and so that's helping a lot with that sort of urban-rural issue. So as someone who kind of a year ago said, okay, so OCD is what the problem is. And the last year I've been a real learning curve of learning about OCD, and then sort of saying, well, what can be done about this? And I have gradually been finding little pieces that I'm not really sure how they all fit together to become a coherent way of people being able to learn about OCD, to get the diagnosis, to get the treatment. And so I'll put up some little things here that I kind of think, they must be relevant in some way, but I'm not really sure that anybody is talking in a coherent way about a strategy for OCD. So there's the Health Promotion Agency, the medical schools, the district health boards, Mental Health Foundation is the more kind of lived experience component. There's GPs. I'm very conscious that our membership at the moment, is perhaps a particular category of sector of society. So people who use Facebook, who are quite well educated, who are reasonably well financed, seem to find their way to Fixate. And what I would really like is to get some ideas and assistance to try and get that information out into all sectors of the community. And I actually think midwives may be a really great way to do that, because everybody has babies. And so I was really thrilled to stumble across Popup, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak today. So next week is OCD Awareness Week. We're actually having a Facebook and Instagram based campaign launched from the Voices of Hope website. And if anyone is watching this video in time, I would just like to invite you to think about joining in our campaign of sharing these posts on Facebook. So the very opening one basically just says that we really feel that people need to talk more about OCD. This midweek post is asking people to please stop using expressions such as I'm so OCD. And I think that's particularly important in the health professional role, because if you are attempting to talk to someone and get support for your OCD, it's really not helpful to feel that the other person doesn't understand and the expression "I'm so OCD" and similar, it kind of minimises and it trivialises the person's experience, and that makes it harder for them to open up. So yeah, I'd just like to just draw that little point to your attention. And so hopefully this talk, and hopefully by the end of OCD Awareness Week, everybody will be a little bit further along in their understanding of what OCD is. That's me.
Right, I was just typing a little message just to the chat group, just saying if you've got any questions now, please feel free to type those questions. You know, thanks, Marion. It's like you say, it's one of those unknown sort of illnesses that people don't know that they perhaps have until they go and seek a professional diagnosis. And, you know, how do we support those mums and dads through that early time? I suppose the first port of call is to work with their LMC, you know, their midwife or their GP if they are having these intrusive thoughts, and you know, hopefully then that person is informed enough to be able to then put them into the right direction to seek the right treatment for their journey ahead. But, have you got sort of any other thoughts about, you know, just that very, very first port of call for them?
I think it's really a question of that first step of talking to anyone at all, you know, whether it's they're talking to their partner or talking to a friend. But yeah, just that first step of telling anyone at all is often, it's kind of the hardest. And then it becomes the case that once you've said it once, you can kind of say it again. But there is just this really huge thing that people don't recognize it. And I think most people now have some idea what anxiety is, and so they recognize when they're anxious, or maybe what depression is, and they recognize when they're depressed. And I think it is partly if someone is seeming anxious or depressed, or as I said, suicidal, of asking those questions about what you're thinking and what's troubling you. Is anything kind of repeatedly, and maybe just getting that little bit of a feel for whether it's kind of a, I suppose, like a realistic worry, which is what I would kind of say anxiety is, whereas OCD, it tends to be, and to an outside person, you kind of say, well, in order for this to be a problem, all these highly unlikely things would have to happen before that would actually really happen. And so I think there's a sense of thinking that this is just, to the outside view, this is kind of so out of proportion. So yeah, I think it's partly about increasing the awareness of those around, which yeah, is what we're doing today. So
right, yeah. Is anyone online who's you know, part of the live chat now this morning had an experience of working with a client who has had perinatal OCD and can give any feedback as to how their journey developed? Feel free to unmute yourself and talk to this if anyone's out there. No, I think everyone's here to learn this morning by the looks of it. But the OCD website, so www.ocd.org.nz, has a wealth of information on it. So it talks through about, you know, what help is available in New Zealand. It's got links to the Fixate Facebook page. It's got information about the ERP, the exposure and response prevention therapy, ACT therapy. So have a look on that, you know, how to find somebody who is trained in that type of therapy and that work. Talk about medication, resources, what is OCD. So there's plenty on there to be able to research through. So yeah, good to know. And of course, next week, OCD Awareness Week, and Parta will be doing a lot of promotion on our social media channels as well with that too. So please feel free to share those to your other networks. But I think we'll start winding up, Marion. And if anyone does have any other information that they do want to share, feel free to put that through to us, or make contact with the Fixate group if you're needing any other information as well.
Just to say, on our website, we have an email address there. So if anyone wants, does at any point, maybe later when you have a particular individual that you'd like to ask or refer, then yeah, we certainly can be emailed through our website.
Excellent, that's great. Well, thanks everyone for your time today, and a huge thank you to Marion as well. Really, just great informative information. Really sort of simplistic way for people to understand it, and then to be able to seek the appropriate help for their mums and dads that they're working with.
Okay, thank you very much, Trina.
Great, thank you.